In all of the episodes of Unsung Heroes, there's a particular word that you don't hear all that often. Sleeper. And a sleeper, of course, is a high-performance car which doesn't look, and more specifically is deliberately trying not to look, as good as it is. Everything from a XJ220 chassis transit van to a high-performance modified Volvo wagon. That is the kind of thing we're looking at. This car, you could say, sort of falls into that category. At the same time, though, it also doesn't. And to clarify what I mean by that, it does not blend in by any stretch. In fact, it looks like the kind of car that you would have won from beating a certain boss in a Need for Speed game. At the same time, though, the looks, although somewhat over the top for a Camry, still belie what this car actually is underneath. Now, some of you on the channel have probably seen this car before. You're probably familiar with it. But for those who aren't, I think this car definitely deserves more attention. Now, this particular Camry was built for the SEMA Motorshow in 2010, and of course there are a ton of crazy creations that appear at shows like that every year. People try to outdo each other or even outdo themselves, and of course there are tons of cars that you could talk about in that sort of way. But the reason why I've singled this one out in particular for this episode is because I would put this car on a very hallowed pedestal. A similar pedestal, in fact, to some of my favourite cars and even some of the cars that have featured in the past of this series. For instance, Renault with the Espace F1. They took a minivan and combined it with Formula 1 technology. Then BMW with the X5 Le Mans took an SUV and fitted it with a Le Mans winning V12. Even others too, like Citroën with the Picasso Cup, combining once again a minivan with WRC tech and even some visual style. There are a number of cars which do that, even something like the aforementioned Jaguar XJ220 transit van, which of course appears occasionally at Goodwood. There's a recurring theme, if you will, of cars that aren't what they appear to be, and cars which are certainly a lot more extreme than they started life as, and this is the pinnacle of that kind of idea, because this is essentially a modern-day interpretation of something like a Plymouth Superbird. A road-homologated NASCAR, or more accurately, stock car, because of course NASCAR is the sport, stock car is the vehicle itself. Now this Toyota Camry is a ground-up rebuild, because it was built as a collaboration between Toyota, specifically TRD, Toyota Racing Development of course, and RK Motors of North Carolina. Now what they did is of course develop, as I said, this car for the SEMA Motor Show, but they did a lot more than just fitting a body kit and some red paint and some big rims to a Camry and hoping for the best. It's actually a lot more than that underneath, and it's underneath where the best work has been done, because this car is actually a NASCAR or stock car for the street. It's powered by a TRD NASCAR spec 358 cubic inch naturally aspirated V8. For our European friends, a 5.9 litre, and in this form it puts out 680 horsepower, all of which is going to the rear wheels through a Tremec T56 manual gearbox. Now everything that I just said tends to be the headline-grabbing stuff that most people know this car for. It's the kind of thing where you can hear it, think, oh, that's kind of cool, and then move on and completely forget that you've ever heard of it. But what impresses me more about this car, and the reason why I wanted to talk about it even more so in this series, is actually because of the smaller details. Because what RK Motors did wasn't just engine swap a NASCAR. Let's be honest, there are plenty of garages who could do that if they had access to one. What they did was way more impressive. They stripped the Camry down to basically its frame, form, and reworked everything about it. The interior, for instance, it looks essentially stock with some extra gauges. It's actually completely redone, to the point where it still has rear seats as well. Practicality in a car that certainly doesn't need it. It has a full sound system. It's designed to be comfortable on the street, not just a track day car, and it's quote-unquote legal, or at least as legal as RK Motors was willing to admit, in most states. Which at first sounds crazy and maybe a little unbelievable, but at the end of the day, if a gas turbine engine motorbike can be street legal, then why not a NASCAR engine Camry? Now, the thing that I love about this car is what I just mentioned. That attention to detail, the fact that they didn't just make it an engine-swapped hot rod or a dragster, it is a car which has a lot of thought put into it. And even though the looks might be a little bit Need for Speed or Midnight Club-esque, the quality of the engineering, the thought put into the car, and the clear effort that you can see from the engine bay alone, let alone everything else, really impresses me. I've actually had a lot of respect for many years for NASCAR engines, if not for the sport itself, because although it is the subject of many jokes, both in America and worldwide, turning left constantly and all that kind of usual cliche, I actually think they make some incredible engines. They are undeniably and unabashedly old school, and yet, if you can build an engine that can essentially run at the red line at 200 miles an hour for hundreds of laps without braking, well, you're going to earn my respect. And that's exactly what this car is powered by. Gone is the front-wheel drive, in is the rear-wheel drive. Gone is about 280 horsepower, in is 680. Top speed, probably around 200, who knows. 0 to 60, I suspect 4 seconds or less. Handling-wise, it might not necessarily worry a Ferrari Scuderia anytime soon, but it's still a 4-door car with a boot. So, you could argue, does it really need to? And the best part of all, you can buy it. Or at least you could back in the day. I'm not sure exactly where the car is now, but at the time they actually put this vehicle on eBay, of all places, for $160,000, which, all things considered, is a pretty amazing price, especially when you compare it, for instance, to the Amuse Carbon R Skyline, which was made famous thanks to Gran Turismo, which is currently for sale at the time of releasing this video for about $1 million. This, in comparison, seems like a steal, and I know which one of the two I would rather have. Skylines are cool, but having a NASCAR engine Camry, yeah, I'll take that any day. To me, a car like this is way too few and far between. It doesn't necessarily need to be a NASCAR engine for it to be what I'm talking about, but this idea of taking raw racing technology and just forcing a muzzle on it to allow it onto the street, as unpure as it may be as a concept, I just think it's inherently cool. The cars that I mentioned earlier, from the Renault to the Citroën to the BMW, there's just something inherently badass about taking racing tech and somehow managing to finagle your way into having it in a street car or a show car, certainly when it's something like a Camry or an SUV or a minivan, and to me, I love this car for that. Big respect from me to RK Motors and to Toyota TRD for working together on this crazy project, and I think that more manufacturers should definitely do crazy stuff like this, if for no other reason than the fun of it. But of course, if you are new to the series of Unsung Heroes, I would recommend clicking the link down below to jump over to the live chat for the channel, because I add all of the new episode vehicles every week in an ongoing poll that you can vote on for your absolute favourite cars that we've ever talked about. So if you are new to the channel, of course check that out, and click the playlist here on screen to check out all of the previous episodes, and there are plenty of them. Over 100, in fact. But until next time, I'll see you then, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.